Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking into Oswal Pumps Limited. They're an Indian manufacturer and exporter, and honestly, they've got some pretty remarkable numbers going on.
Yeah, we've got the sources here, articles, research data, and the plan is really to pull out the key takeaways for you.
And it's pretty timely, too, wouldn't you say? They've got a major IPO launching right now.
Exactly. Kicks off June 13th. So looking at them now gives us, well, a very relevant perspective on where they're headed.
Okay, so let's get into the basics. Founded back in 2003.
Right, based in Karnal, Haryana. They do pumps, motors, cables, the usual stuff for that industry.
But the sources really highlight one area, operating under that Oswal brand.
Solar pumping systems, that seems to be the main event for them.
And that solar focus, it looks like it's become this massive growth engine.
Oh, absolutely. You look at their recent performance, it's explosive. And it's heavily, heavily tied to the Indian government's PM-KUSUM scheme.
Yeah, the big push for solar agricultural pumps.
Precisely. And Oswal isn't just, taking part, they're kind of dominating it.
Dominating. How so?
Well, the data suggests they're one of the biggest suppliers. Get this. 38% of all the installations in India under that scheme as of December 2024.
Wow, 38%.
Yeah, that's over 2.3 lakh pumps they've supplied. Having that kind of share in a major government program, that's huge.
Okay, 38%. That's more than just big. It's almost a controlling stake in that segment. And I assume this scale is showing up dramatically in their financials.
You bet. The growth is steep. Revenue nearly doubled in fiscal 24.
Doubled.
Yeah, 97% year-on-year growth. And the profit growth, even more, extraordinary.
How extraordinary?
Net profit jumped by something like 477% between fiscal 22 and 24.
477%. Okay.
And the efficiency metrics are through the roof. Return on equity, 88.73% in FY24. Return on capital employed, 81.85%.
Those are really high numbers.
They really are. It tells you they're incredibly efficient at making money from the capital they have, likely boosted massively by the scale from PM-KUSUM. They're getting serious bang for their buck.
So incredible numbers, driven largely by this one big scheme. Operationally, how are they set up to handle all this volume? Sources mentioned vertical integration.
That's a key point. They make the pumps, the motors, and the solar modules themselves, all in-house in Karnal.
Okay, so that gives them control.
Control, yeah, and probably speed and cost advantages, too. Crucial when you're bidding for large government tenders like KUSUM. Plus, their distribution network's grown fast, almost doubled since FY22, and they export to 22 countries now.
That reach definitely helps. Now, the IPO you mentioned runs June 13th to 17th, aiming for 1,387 crore.
That's the target, yeah. A significant amount.
And what are they planning to do with the money?
Looks like three main things. Capital expenditure, so expanding their manufacturing. A big chunk, 272 crore, is going into their subsidiary, Oswal Solar, specifically to make more solar modules.
Makes sense, given the focus.
And the third bit, quite large too, 280 crore, is set aside to pay down existing debt.
Right. So fueling growth, strengthening the balance sheet, strategic moves. But, growth this fast, tied so closely to one program, there have to be risks, right? What's the flip side?
Absolutely. And this is where you really need to look closely. The biggest red flag the sources raise is concentration risk. It's high.
How high?
Look at the numbers. 78.50%, nearly 80% of their revenue in the first 9 months of this fiscal year came just from PMK.
78%. Wow.
And last year,
it was lower, but still significant. 44.77% in FY24. That's a huge chunk of business riding on one government scheme continuing just as it is.
Yeah, that's a dependency.
And it's not just the scheme. The business is overwhelmingly agricultural, 96.55% of revenue recently. Plus, geographically concentrated too, mostly Haryana and Maharashtra.
So any shifts in policy funding, even weather in those specific areas, could really impact them. Exactly. That's a substantial risk. On top of that, you have the usual stuff like raw material prices fluctuating and, naturally, competition heating up in the solar pump space.
Okay. And what about the valuation heading into this IPO?
The sources actually call it out. The pre-issue price-to-earnings ratio is 62.54.
Which is high.
Well, the analysis explicitly says it suggests the stock is in the overvalued zone before trading even starts, meaning the market is already baking in really, really high expectations for future growth.
Got it. So let's boil this down. We've got a company on an incredible growth tear.
Explosive, almost. Clearly powered by being a major player in this big national solar program.
Backed by strong operations, impressive financials.
That's a but. hugely dependent on that one scheme and that one sector.
Right. It's like they've grabbed a huge opportunity, but that opportunity itself creates a vulnerability.
Perfectly put. Which leads to the final thought for you, the listener. With so much riding on PM-KUSUM, what happens if government priorities or funding levels change down the road? And how effectively can their IPO-funded plans like expanding solar module production and maybe diversifying actually reduce that reliance over the long term?
That's the key question, isn't it? Something to really think about.